Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the 5th webinar of the Global AI Leader Series. I'm Theos Evgeniou, and I've been hosting this series for you. Today, we are visiting China, and we have with my colleague Annette Aris another exceptional guest with us, Professor Lan Xue, who is the Cheung Chair, Distinguished Professor and Dean of Schwarzman College at Tsinghua University, and also wears a number of different hats, including being the chair of the Chinese National AI Governance Experts Committee. And with Annette Aris, my colleague, who's also a faculty of strategy at INSEAD and the board member of a number of companies, including ASML, the semiconductors company. Together with Lan, we'll discuss, the three of us, about issues around AI governance, innovations in China, but also in relation to the rest of the world. Next slide, please. This is again one of the elements, one of the webinars of the series. We've had already 4 that are also all recorded. You can find them on the website of the series and also on YouTube. We have one more next week on Monday, where we will discuss with Percy Yang from Stanford University. We'll go back to scientific issues around and topics around generative AI. Remember, the objective of the series is to cover scientific, business, and policy issues and views from around the world. So today we focus a lot on policies, but also business. And next time we will go back and focus to scientific topics. And then we wrap up on July 10. As always, you are muted, video off, chat is closed. But if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A tab, voting up and down the most popular questions so that we make sure we focus on what you are mostly interested in. Please add as many questions as you like. We'll spend some time on your questions today. The topic is very, I'm sure, of big interest and very complicated, so I'm sure there will be lots of questions. As always, the webinar will be recorded and will be public. And for technical issues, please email if you have any issues to digital@insead.edu. Next slide, please. So, as always, given the topic of the day today, let's start with a quick audience poll. Yes or no? Will AI be governed by global principles in the next 5 years? Let's see what people think. It seems that so far, almost a tie. Do we need global principles? Do we have to do those things? Will it be done? Some of the topics we'll discuss. How should we govern AI? Let's see. Let's give it some time. Give a couple of, maybe a few more seconds. It is very, very split. Perhaps not surprisingly, there's a slight advantage for a no. Clearly, this is a very big challenge. I'm curious what everybody thinks about why this is such a challenge. There are many reasons. We'll probably touch a bunch of them during the webinar today. Let's dive in and welcome Professor Lan Xue and my colleague Annette Aris. Lan, Annette, thank you very much for your time. Welcome to the webinar. You turn on your cameras, we'll get moving. So the results, as you see, is mostly no. Yes, okay, fine. So close this one. Sorry. Welcome. Very nice to have you here. Thank you for your time. Very excited to talk about this topic. First of all, we'll discuss a number of topics together around China's AI and digital innovation ecosystem, about the approach of the country to AI regulations and governance, how it relates to what happens with the rest of the world. And Annette, you are there also as having some expertise on what's happening on the ground in Europe. And also go back to the poll question around global coordination possibilities for AI governance. Let me start with you, Lan, and welcome you. As I mentioned, you have a number of different hats, a very impressive list of positions you are holding. And some of them relate to AI, including the National AI Experts Committee on AI Governance of China. Out of curiosity, maybe for the audience, can you tell us a little bit more about the kind of topics and questions related to AI you see mostly being discussed these days in the space, either in your committee or in general? And welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, thank you very much for inviting me to this dialogue series. Good evening and good afternoon. I don't know, depending on what time zone you are in. I'm very happy to be part of this dialogue. I think in terms of the issues now, that people in China who are concerned with about related to AI. I think the first thing that people are closely watching is what is the new development in AI, in big models, any new things coming up, and that's sort of something that people pay a lot of attention to. And the second thing is also in recent weeks and days, there's also a lot of discussion about AI safety. About also how to provide international regime that help to make AI safer. So those are some of the things that people are very much concerned about.
So, out of curiosity, before I go to you, Annette, on the poll, if you can share your view, what would you vote? I know you could not vote because you are hosts.
I
what
would
would you
vote.
vote? Do you think there would be like?
Yeah, I would vote no. I think that I agree with the majority of the audience here that global principles alone would not be enough to to provide a good governance. I think we probably need a lot of things. We need technology. We need governance systems. We need people's the public participation. And so we need a lot of things to be able to provide a useful governance.
Participation, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it's me.
Yeah. So that's what I think that we need. So we need a lot of things more than just some principles. But of course, principles are useful, but we need more. Of course, that some various governance tools such as legislations, like in European Union, they have this AI Act, and there are also some specific regulations. All of those would be very useful.
So that's a good segue to you, Annette. Thank you again for your time. So Annette, you are close to the DG Connect, the Director General Connect of the European Commission, which is from where the famous EU AI Act has just recently been released. And question for you, given the discussion of the day today, what are, in your opinion, some of the key differences between China and Europe regarding the questions that are at the center stage today, and also maybe some useful questions?
So I'm not a China expert, so Lan, I depend on you to add to what I'm saying. So I think that if you look at Europe, Europe is always accused of being a regulator rather than an innovator. And Europe being the first one to have this AI Act would underline this point. However, taking a step back, I think what works really well. So what Europe has done is really taking a step back and saying, this thing is going very, very fast, and we have to pinpoint and develop a framework which really focuses on the key risks while not impeding the innovation. So they've been very, very clear in defining what are unacceptable risks, which are around social scoring, exploitation of vulnerabilities, etc., etc. Then what are high-risk things which have to be approved before they can be launched? And then a lot of things where there's only, you need to be transparent about what you're doing, that this is a fake and not a real thing, and then you can go ahead. And then there's a lot of things where it's minimal or no risk where people can go ahead. So I think, first of all, thinking about what is risk and how to define it, the definition of that might be different by region, but I think the approach in itself is extremely helpful. So that's the first thing, and I would love to hear, Lan, I assume that in China you're also thinking about risks and how you handle this question. The other thing where people talk a lot less about is that Europe also is doing a lot to stimulate AI. So it's not only putting in place regulations, they have a lot of activities to help the AI ecosystem to develop. So they have, first of all, a 4 billion fund to help AI startups. They have a whole initiative where with smart cities to support that. They have a thing around languages, how to have AI support translations and protect all the European languages. So there's a lot more going on, but less talked about. So I think in any government, you have to think both on where do you regulate in a really smart way, so you prevent the worst risks, but enable innovation. And on the other hand, what can you do to stimulate? And Lan, I would love to hear from you, how far China is in this. Do you already have an AI Act? What are the pain points in the regulation discussion?
Okay.
Yeah, Lan, ball to you. That was a good pass.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you. I think I think actually we are very much in agreement that AI, there are two wheels in promoting the AI development. One is innovation, the other is regulation. I think that from the very beginning, I think in 2017, China had published an AI development plan. And I think that actually emphasized both, saying that, first of all, you need to innovate, you need to push the innovation, but also that the document also recognized that there might be risks associated with AI's development and application. So there's need to be a proper governance system to make sure that those risks are mitigated. So that's the general attitude. But in terms of how to do that, I think that, first of all, let me say that I really admire EU's capability in looking at the issue in a very comprehensive way, and then to go through the process to develop the AI Act. I think that's really, I think, a very good framework and a very good way for people to look at it. But at the same time, we also recognize, I think at least in China, we recognize that there's so much uncertainty in AI's development in terms of capabilities, in its application and so on. So it'd be very hard to think ahead before that's fully, being, sort of demonstrated, to be able to think of a structure to cover all of those potentials. And so I think China's approach, I would call it, in contrast to the EU's approach, China's approach is probably more adaptive. We certainly hope, I myself and my colleagues, we are hoping to, to push for an agile governance. But at least, we should try to be adaptive. So when technology moves, your regulation try to move along. But, we know that technology will move further, and then we'll try to catch up. So that's the kind of situation we are in now.
So agility is a key word, and it sounds like you are thinking about this somewhere between how the US and Europe are thinking about this. I don't know, maybe in some ways.
So maybe let me ask one question, because when I talk to the DG Connect from European Union, and passing through regulation is an enormous, cumbersome process, especially in the EU, because you have to get all the countries aligned. You might be a bit quicker in China there. But the question really is, so you want to find the balance between kind of previewing a few things with the risk that you maybe prevent some developments, but on the other hand, also not be too late, because the thing develops, it might already be out there. And so in the definition of what the key risks are, how far and how aligned are you in China if you say, well, these are the key things? I'm just kind of, as example, things like emotion recognition or biometric categorization or all those. Do you have kind of a list where you think, well, these are the key risks we're going to pay extra attention to, or are you just looking and seeing what emerge and then react?
Just because you may have regulations which are for specific things. So I'm aware of some regulations on deep fakes, for example. So maybe there are existing things already.
Yeah, I think actually in China, I think first of all, I think that in 2019 that our AI governance committee, we provided some general principles, what we call the AI governance principles, where we have 8 principles that really we try to provide some guidance to the companies, to all the people who are involved in AI development and application. So we say, okay, these are the principles that you should follow. So that's sort of the in general and a kind of a comprehensive sort of general guidelines. And also later there will also be some ethical guidelines as well. And so that's sort of, first of all, I think that's the general the high sort of principles we follow. Secondly, I think also that there were also several legislations that that came out in around the year 2021 that provide legal sort of boundaries in terms of data governance, in terms of personal information protection, and so on. So that's another layer that provides the the basic legal framework. And then I think exactly as you said, there are, when you related to some specific applications, I think because I think it's very hard for the government to think ahead what are the possible applications. So actually China actually was particularly during around the year 2020 in that I think there was really a wide spectrum of AI application in different domains. So there, I think that when China sees a problem, then the government would provide, would address it with some specific regulations, like for example, like deep fake, like algorithm, that the guarding against, I mean, for example, there were cases that some of the algorithm for delivery, people, that was, very tight. So that actually generated, some health risks and so on. So that was reported, and then the government came out very quickly with a regulation on guarding against those type of algorithms. So there, I think that's the Chinese approach. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the key difference is really that in Europe, in order to get the regulation, you have to first get the Commission, and then you get the European Parliament, then all the 27 ministers to approve. So the framework has to be more, it cannot be too specific. It has to be more, the risk-based and things. And in China, indeed, I think it's probably easier to, like you say, to be more agile as you can react it. You can react more specific and quicker.
So it's very domain specific.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much. Let me switch gears a bit, and we'll come back to regulation and also go to kind of alignment potentially, or global kind of governance if we can ever get there, back to the poll we started. So we talked about safety, but also innovation. So on the innovation side, I mean, we all know China did an excellent job in terms of the internet economy. I mean, China is the only other place in the world outside the US where you have like something like looks like a big tech. So first of all, Lance, starting from you, A, does this give an advantage to China? B, what are some lessons from the internet story of China that maybe can apply now to the AI story? And C, in general, what are the advantages you think China may have in developing AI relative to other regions? So lessons and advantages, maybe.
Okay, let's go one by one. Can you? I've already paid attention to the number.
Sorry, I went fast.
The third question, but let's get to the first question you have.
Let's get the first question. Lessons from the internet for China that probably that may apply for the AI, about how you did such an amazing job.
Okay. Well, I think first of all, I think that you're right. I think there is some similarities in terms of the internet and AI development and application. I think in terms of AI internet development, I think China certainly, I think enjoys a very strong research base. China has very strong S&T capabilities. So that actually provides, not only just, in terms of addressing both development and application problems, but also can provide, a good, human resources for the internet development. So I think I would say that that's probably one advantage that can also apply to AI. The second thing is that the internet is such that actually scale matters. So China has a large scale in terms of people. So I think any small innovation that can very quickly be be expanded and then generate some huge benefits. So I think that also it's also quite important. And the third is also how to create an ecosystem to allow innovation to flourish. And I think that's actually for China, that's important because China had a legacy of so-called planned economy. And over the last 40 years, China is making the transition to a market-based economy, but still, sometimes that there's probably too many regulations and restrictions, and so. But here, I think that China, one thing that makes the internet a success story is that actually its government is trying to create an environment that fosters innovation.
So talent, scale, ecosystem during transition are three of the lessons from the internet, worked well for the internet era, and this recipe to continue. You mentioned talent. That's something we saw also in an earlier webinar about the importance of talent and talent attraction for the AI development that we all know. Having said this, the internet also is a bit different in China than the rest of the world. So, for example, Annette, there are a lot more super apps in China, while the West has a lot more like big tech. Starting again, we're transitioning from the online internet AI to the offline AI slowly. Do you think there is an influence on how the super apps versus big tech kind of design of the internet in the two parts of the world matters for the AI world today, Annette?
Yeah, so I think you refer to the fact that companies like Tencent and Alibaba, that once you get into the app, you can do all aspects from life, from banking, taxing, whatever. And in the Western world, it's more focused. So for social networks, you have Meta. For e-commerce, you have Amazon. For search, you have Google. And so at first sight, and I would love to get your perspective on this, and you would say, China is better off because in a super app, you have all the data combined of what consumers are doing. And, Google only has search data, Meta has only social data. So they basically have less data to develop their Gen AI or to train their Gen AI on. Taking a step back, I think it's a bit more nuanced because if you say, well, what are these big tech companies in the Western world doing? So they're building huge cloud parks, data center parks, enabled to be, to do Gen AI and to train it. They have big investments in their training models, in their foundational models, and basically they scrape the whole internet to get those data. And so it's only in the very specific part where you say, well, the specific data they have on top of what you can get from the World Wide Web, that they might have less data than the Alibaba and Tencents of the world. I think they're probably similar good with regard to infrastructure, so data and chips, data centers and chips. They're probably as good with regard, to the development of the algorithms and those things. The only competitive difference might be in the access to data. But then I don't really know how much access those big tech companies have to the data of all the players in their super apps. So, Lam, I don't know what your assessment is there.
I think in China's situation is probably not much different from what you just described. I think the big data, the big companies, and they certainly, I think, of course, Alibaba has a lot of data of their users, but also increasingly, I think there are people are really aware of this data, security issue about how to protect their personal data, and so increasingly there's more regulations on how those data can be used and can be tapped. And when a lot of applications, and now you have to get your permission from the customers to be able to collect those data. So I think that there might be some convergence in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and yeah. Sorry.
So yeah, that's interesting. The point about this multiple diverse type of data from the, let's say, the local ecosystem of a super app versus a more targeted specific kind of structure that we have outside China is an interesting one, but it applies, of course, only online. Now if we go to offline and move slowly towards AI, not on the internet, but everywhere else. Lan, question to you. Do you see any industries where maybe China, for whatever reasons, maybe kind of have a strength in terms of developing AI for those specific industries? And if so, what could that potentially be, the reasons? Any thoughts on this?
Well, I think, first of all, I think that one advantage I think China has is that China has a lot of application scenarios. I think that we call that, so in a way there is application scenarios. I think China is very rich in that. One example is in manufacturing. China still has probably the largest manufacturing capabilities in the world, and in manufacturing all kinds of products, and those applications would be extremely useful for AI to find its way to gain efficiency and to improve productivity. So I would say that if you say there's one area, I think I would say that in manufacturing, that's probably, I think, where China has an advantage, just simply because there's so many possible areas the AI can be used.
Very interesting. And I don't know if you have something to add to this, or maybe something else different.
No, but
no,
I think the point you make, Lan, is very interesting, because you talk about these application scenarios. Because what you see happening in the Western world is, yes, a lot of companies are embracing AI and Gen AI, but it's very bottom up. So I've seen recently, I talked to also manufacturing companies, ABB, for example, or Deutsche Telekom. They have a great setup in how they think about what to do with Gen AI. They have all these pilots, they roll it out, they test it, but it's all bottom up. It's all individual companies doing their thing. And so we don't have let's think about the financial industry and how could we improve the financial industry as a whole by using AI. So it's very much a bottom up approach. And if you look at what companies are doing, they're focusing initially a lot on things which improve productivity, like customer service, or analyzing data, internal data, and things like that, and not so much yet in really new business models or new services. And if you look where they stand overall, most of these companies have a bit of FOMO, so everyone does something with Gen AI. But it's very often just small pilots and and they're very scared to scale it up and apply it big time, because they're afraid for snafus. And I think if you have this more top-down scenario for an industry, you probably can make it much easier to make this step from the pilot to the scale-up.
So in fact, in general, Lan, maybe there is what's the balance between, top-down, national level, or industry level kind of, push or coordination? You also mentioned the concept of the ecosystem in China. Maybe you can open up that one. What is this interplay between top and
I think in terms of the industry application and so on, I think in China it's also bottom up. Okay. I think that in China, all the companies, they have to make their own decisions. Nobody's going to pay for their AI applications. Particularly the early stage, it's going to be quite substantial investment would be needed. And I think many of the consulting companies, when they look at the AI application, they found that initial stage you have to invest quite a lot before you see any gains in productivity. So so that I think each company would have to make their own decisions. I don't think there's anyone that's going to help with them.
What
But
did you
certainly,
mean
I think
then?
Mhm.
Sorry, what did you mean then with application scenarios?
Well,
What are those?
when I mean application scenarios that you know, if for example, you know, manufacturing, you know, industry. I you know saw recently there was an example in mining industry that people would think that's something so fundamental that and so really hard, so labor kind of a work, but how actually AI can be used, and it turned out there's a lot of application that actually AI can be used. So I think it's actually it's more of a various kind of production activities, and also in service, also there's a lot of things that in service internet you can find applications. That's why what I mean, there's a kind of rich set of application scenarios. But of course, all of those, the companies themselves have to find it. And so many startups, they find a particular niche, and then they will go and do something there and then move forward. But I also wanted to mention that as someone who worked in the public administration, indeed, I think there are also applications where I think AI can be used to improve public service. One example is in Hangzhou City. They use the AI system to help to regulate the traffic in the city, and it has really quite a substantial improvement. Yeah, that's one example where public service can also be improved by AI.
I think I think yes, indeed, a lot has to come from entrepreneurialism, either startups or corporates being very innovative. I still also wonder with AI, because it's about the amount of data and the training, and it also has very, very high cost to train.
Sure.
That for specific, I'm just thinking, for example, in banking, you have this know your customer, and every single bank is spending so much money in getting this on control. And basically, they analyze the same people and the same type of transaction. So that is something which is something maybe you as an industry could think about, how to use AI to do this rather than everyone for themselves. And so I think finding a balance in the industry between what is your competitive advantage and you want to do on your own, and what are things maybe which will benefit a whole industry, but it's not a thing you compete on, might be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let me change a bit topics and go to something that I'm sure the audience and everybody in the world is very interested in. You mentioned compute and training, Annette, and that's very expensive. You mentioned talent and data and scale, LAN. But the inputs, the key inputs to AI is talent, data, and of course also compute. And of course you have the business side that has to drive it, because otherwise if there is no resources, then nothing works, obviously. So on the compute side, I mean, we are all familiar with the challenges of kind of how the global compute landscape has been changing in recent years, with restrictions, with kind of potential kind of separation of ecosystems. So I have an opening question for you, Lan, and you can share whatever thought you have, or you can share with us. Question number one: can China gain compute independence for AI applications, and how do people think about this going forward? Because given the current situation.
I totally understand what's behind your question. Certainly, indeed, I think that we've seen, because of geopolitical environment, I think it's very challenging for China to gain the most advanced chips for AI training, for AI application. So indeed, that really forces. I think actually, if we go back to the year of say 2018 and so on, we are in a global innovation system where I think people really work together, exchange, compete, also collaborate. right? And so people, can buy things from the international market and then also sell. Unfortunately, that globalization was disrupted by the current geopolitical environment. And so China is no longer able to have access to the most advanced chips. So that really forces China to develop its own indigenous capabilities. It may take some time, but I think that really forces China to do. So I think some people I think say that China wants to decouple. That's totally wrong. China does not want to decouple from the world. China still wants to be connected with the global S&T innovations ecosystem. So China is still a very key part of it. If you look at scientific research papers, China publishes the most paper in the world among all the countries. So China makes a huge knowledge contribution to the world. So I think the restrictions to China in those key technologies certainly adds a lot of difficulties and challenges, and forces China to be, to develop in indigenous capabilities. But that certainly will not stop China being open, stop China being wanted to open to collaborate with international partners, but at the same time also to develop its own indigenous capabilities. So yeah.
Sorry, I mean, the idea of interrupted you. Going back to developing the independence in some way, its own capabilities, maybe not independence.
But so I would not call it independence.
Yes.
Yeah, I would not call it independence. So China wants to collaborate. So I think, but also want to have its indigenous capabilities. Yeah.
So now you are designing another, kind of robust ecosystem around compute in some ways and developing
exactly.
Could you share any thoughts about what are the kind of policies that are put in place or to build this new ecosystem in some ways for digital in general?
Well, I think China, of course, here I think there are also government efforts to try to provide funding and provide policy to support companies to develop those capabilities, and also try to see how actually there can be applications that the people can try and trial and error, and so that's there's no easy way. There's no easy way. I think we all know that it's difficult, but still you have to go through that.
Annette, you are sitting across on the other side. I also mentioned your other hat at ASML, which is a key company in the global compute ecosystem or chain, if you like. Any thoughts about all these issues regarding how different parts of the world can overcome limitations due to export controls, China or also other countries?
Yeah, so first of all, let me say I'm sitting here as an INSEAD professor and not as a board member of ASML. I'm also as a non-executive director, I can't speak and won't speak on behalf of ASML. That's not my role. That's the role of the executive management. But if I take a step back and just look at the dynamics in the semiconductor industry, and I think underlining Lan's point. So if you look at the semiconductor ecosystem, the thing is, it's a very, very thin value chain. I mean, in every step, there are very often only one or two players. So ASML is almost the only one who can provide lithography machines. In the foundries, who produce the chips, they're very specialized. There are only a couple of speakers. Some of our suppliers at ASML, or the ASML suppliers, are also the only ones who can make the product. And it's a very thin ecosystem, and that there's a reason for that, because in order to develop at the speed we have with Moore's law, you need to do a lot of upfront investments. And then you have to be sure that whenever you get the products, you can actually sell them at reasonable prices and not have a lot of competition. But also, you can only do it if you work very, very intensively together with your suppliers and your customers. There's no way you can do it, like in the car industry, that you produce a part and then you sell it on. So the only way the Moore's law can be, and we have this enormous increase in compute power, which enables Gen AI, is because this this ecosystem is unique in the world in the way it is integrated, working together and supporting each other. You know, if sometimes even if suppliers say, well, I cannot do the upfront investment, the customer might say, I pre-finance it. But so it's a very integrated chain. And so the moment you start breaking this up, you might slow down the speed of innovation. So that's the first point I want to make. Second point is because you work so together, it's a complete different story than, for example, gas or commodities. It's people are truly mutual dependent. So if you so you can say, well, we make a double world where we have a Chinese world and a Western world, and they become completely independent from each other. You might question, you know, if you have a world where it is integrated and people are really dependent on each other, that is also ensuring sovereignty. So I think that's a philosophical question. It's different from, you know, standard products like gas, which you can move around the world. If you have a true dependence in working together and, you know, helping each other with maintaining the product and upgrading the product. So that's a more philosophical. And then the third thing, if you look at China, I remember when, you know, a couple of years ago, you know, China was nowhere. So they produced 4% of the chips in the world. 40% of the chips of the world would pass through China, you know, by the making of iPhones. And their own need was about 25% of the chips of the world. Over the past years, China has been building up the capacity, so at least it can produce the chips they need on its own. And so I think in that sense, the balance in the world should be such that you know, we don't want to have an oversupply of cheap Chinese chips, but on the other hand, China should be able to also provide their own country of chips. So it's a very complicated question, which I think you also really have to understand the specifics on the industry to make wise choices. And there are certain ways where it will be very difficult to catch up for China technological, but then there are other ways if you want to make, you know, chips which have a very high compute powers. It doesn't necessarily need to be through advanced lithography machines. There are other methods to get there. And so I think that maybe if you put in a lot of barriers, you might slow down things for, you know, 1 to 5 years. But then afterwards, actually, you might have accelerated things. And so I think this question, we have to be very careful that we don't go, you know, for too easy arguments.
I fully agree with Annette's point. I think that you said it much better than I could have said. Let me just add one point that actually, in a way, a lot of this, restrictions and this kind of a embargo on China actually also hurts global ecosystem. Because I think, you know, when a producer like this company is making this most advanced chips, if they have China as a customer, they can get much more profitabilities, and then they can actually, you know, spend more money on R&D and, you know, moving forward. But the losing China, and probably China, before this kind of restriction, China was probably the largest customer of the most advanced chips. And then actually it's hurting the interest of the companies, including SML and also the chip makers. So I think, so we are actually entering into a kind of lose-lose, you know, situation. So it's very unfortunate, but that's the kind of a, you know, I think the situation that's being, China was forced to get, into, but certainly China didn't want to get into it.
Thanks for this. Let's get out of this very specific and, of course, as we know, very difficult topic. I want to make sure we cover some of it because I'm sure everybody in the world loves to hear views on this topic. Switch gears, go a little bit back to the safety point you said at the beginning. and I'll refer to an article in Nature magazine you published.
By the way, sorry, it's in Science, not in Nature.
Science, sorry,
Science.
my mistake.
Science.
You're right. Oh, yeah, Science. Yes, Science. Sorry, my fault. It's in Science magazine you published a month ago or so with a global team of many authors on managing extreme AI risks amid rapid progress. First of all, you go through the list of the authors there. It's impressive, and it's from all over the world. How do you get together? And what was the idea? And maybe you can share with us some highlights from this work you did together and the exchanges you had with this team. Yes, Lan, how do you get together all this team together in the article? What are some highlights?
I was contacted by one of the corresponding authors, basically talked, the email about mentioned about this idea, and which I found it's really a fascinating idea, and so I very fully supported the idea of having such an article. So I was then I think when I saw some draft, I provided my comments, contributions, and also what we've done in China on those issues, and to be ideas to be included in that. And so that's sort of the process that started. Yeah.
And any highlights, or maybe more broadly, any highlights? You also mentioned, I see a question in the audience, just to start covering some of those, and maybe relate to this. I'm not sure. You mentioned early on today in our discussion about 8 principles that you set in China for AI development. Is there any overlap between those 8 principles and what you discussed in the article? What would be some of those 8 principles? If you can share some of them with us, the principles of China for AI in China.
Well, I think actually for the 8 principles we had, actually, when we were trying to develop those, the AI governance principles, we actually looked around and to see what are other, principles people have. It turned out actually there's a great consensus on some general principles. So I think that's really a wonderful thing. That is, in general, when people think about AI applications, when people think about the possible risks, people have similarity. People wanted to have those kind of governance mechanism to control those risks. One thing that I think that I might say that would be unique for the Chinese principles is the 8th one is the agile governance. We clearly put that into the China's AI governance principles. That's probably unique. So far, that's the only one I've seen, in the governance principle having that one in. But I could be wrong. So Annette, you might have some better ideas. What are the other countries and or maybe in Europe and so on.
So I must confess, Len, I don't know what your 8 principles are. So
okay.
Yeah.
And that was about the agility question.
I think the 8 principles, we have the harmony and the friendliness, fairness and justice, inclusiveness, and the respect for privacy, security and the controllability, shared responsibility, open collaboration, and agile governance. I think that's a translation of the Chinese principles. Yeah.
So now, just going back to the poll a bit, the poll about having some common ground and kind of trying to close, before going to some more questions from the audience, trying to close maybe with more optimistic view. I don't know. We'll see what comes out. So you had a lot of authors from around the world for an article. You have many principles which are common, as you said, across different regions. But then, how far do we need to go, and how far are we able to go in terms of some kind of global coordination and maybe even global institutions for AI governance, UN types or other types or WTO types? How far can we go? Because we have principal alignments at high level, it seems, but how far can we go, do you think, and what are the challenges for potentially having global institutions for AI? Any thoughts on this?
Well, I think you know I wanted Annette to also have an opportunity to share. I think for me I think you know, first of all, I think I'm very happy to see that in the last few years there's a lot of effort globally in trying to address this issue. You know, for example, in the UK, Bletchley Park, you know, the conference, and I think actually a lot of countries have participated in that conference and have some general agreements there, and also in some other multilateral mechanisms, sort of G20 and so on. Also there was discussion. And also at UN, there's kind of this high-level advisory, body that's also trying to develop a way. So I think that there's many efforts in trying to find a possible way to provide a kind of architecture for global governance of AI risks. So I think that's hopeful. And also, actually, in addition to that, there are also many bilateral and multilateral, dialogues and discussions. So hopefully, that will help to provide some, structure. But at the same time, that for people who study global governance, we recognize that AI governance is a very typical problem of regime complex issue, meaning that this is an issue that there are many governing regimes that probably overlapping each other, probably contradicting with one another, and so on. So it's very not easy to sort it out. So that's, I think the reality we have to face.
There's a question from the audience.
Shall I maybe comment on that?
Sorry,
shortly? Yeah.
So
I think, so if you look at it, I first of all think that part of it has to go by osmosis. So what do I mean by that? If you look, for example, the GDPR, which was launched in Europe, then had a huge impact on all the privacy regulations in the rest of the world. And I know the EU is doing a lot of work in talking with other countries also around the AI Act and kind of get it exported, so to say. And partly it is exported because for US tech companies, it's much too complicated to do different things in different worlds. So that wouldn't really apply to China, but for the rest of the world, that I think this osmosis is important, and the advocacy. And the other thing, I think, like you said, Len, there are some basic principles we all globally agree, and we probably don't agree that much on the exact, if you then go into the details and what does it exactly mean, there might be different views on things. But to get the alignment on the basic principles and give some freedom in translating these basic principles to concrete regulations and actions, I think would be a first step. And that therefore you need, and I think hopefully things like United Nations and other where people talk will help there. Like, and then finally there might be some things which are so threatening for our planet that we might get, like with the nuclear arms, we might actually see, everyone sees, well, if we don't do something here, we might destroy the world. We might get concrete alignments. But I think those are the three levels we can do something on.
Yeah. Let me just add one thing that probably in terms of the, also, people say, particularly at the level 3, and, maybe there's a need for some kind of global institution like the IAEA or, like other type of things. So I think that's the discussion people have.
There is a related question from the audience, and I'm not sure how far we want to go in that direction. It has to do specifically with differing approaches to data privacy and security between Europe and China. first of all, are there significant differences in data privacy and security? And if so, how does this affect collaboration efforts? But also, how does it impact businesses which operate across the world, of course? Any thoughts on privacy and security? Not AI specifically, but data privacy specific, not AI in general, data privacy specifically, on differences that may have an impact. And if you would like to take this.
Yeah, let me say something. First of all, I don't know much, so about specifics, but certainly I think China has a law on personal information privacy protection. So I think it will be interesting project to compare that with the European regulations. I assume GDPR will be the one to be compared with. So I think that can be done, but certainly I've not done that myself.
Yeah. I think the key. So I think with regard to companies, the regulations are probably pretty similar to the extent I know. There is some difference in the amount of data the state is allowed to gather between Europe and China. And so I think from the point of view of a company, if working with China or exporting to China or building factories in China, of course you have to be aware of all the regulations. I don't think from a company perspective it's very different. And then you have to be aware that what the different approaches by the state to data gathering and other things, and how that then affects your customers in China and other things. So I think it's those two levels you have to distinguish. But data regulation for companies is pretty similar, I would say.
Thanks. There's a question. Maybe I start from you, Annette, as it has to do also with boards. What advice would you get from the speakers for boards to discuss, to understand how to best navigate governance on geopolitical risk? I'm not sure I understand the question. Anyway, boards and geopolitical risk, especially on business operations. Annette, it's a big question.
So I think, again, boards are not the executive management, but from the point of view of a board, I think you have to just make sure that the due diligence about what exactly the regulations are is done really, really well, and you take it into account. And then also, if you see that the playing ground is very different or it's too complicated, you might consider, is that a showstopper to enter that market? But it's more a question of making sure that you're really aware of what the differences are, and it's a bit of a generic answer, and then draw your conclusions.
Okay. I mean, we have actually, we don't have time for another question. So let me just close with a question to both of you. We covered quite a lot of ground. We did a deep dive on compute independence and not independence, but capabilities development, on regulations and similarities, many similarities, but also some differences across regions on different industries where maybe there is an advantage for China, like in manufacturing in general, for example. And we also said that there seems to be some hope and some discussions going on in terms of some kind of global alignment and coordination, at least at the principles level, and potentially for some big common risks that we all face. If we were to close with just one last point, both of you, what do you hope we will collectively achieve in AI governance the next 2 to 5 years? How far do you hope we will reach? Let's start, Annette, with you, so we close with Lan.
I hate the 1-point question, but
well, if there's something.
I think the most important thing for me is, so we're very early days, we're in the hype phase of AI, people are trying a lot of things, and for me the most important point would be that that we make sure that AI doesn't discriminate and polarizes. And I think those are the two big societal risks. And so I would put my focus on those.
So basically, let's achieve some kind of control on polarization and discrimination, maybe learn something else on the innovation side, or maybe whatever you would like to share with us as a closing remark, or any closing remark from you.
Okay, I certainly fully agree with Annette's point. Let me add one more. that is, two more. One is to also to collaborate to guard against the existential risks that might be posed by the development of AI. Another thing that we have not done enough, we have not talked enough, is how actually we can bring the other countries, other developing countries into this dialogue. The governing of AI's risk is not just the it's not the prerogative of US, EU, and China, but also people in Africa, people in Latin America. They should also be brought into this dialogue. So we should have a global platform to allow people to participate in the discussion about guarding the risk, and also how about make the diffusion of the technology to generate the benefit the whole mankind. So that's what we should aim for.
Wonderful point, Lan. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
While we focused a lot on China and Europe and the US a bit today, given where you are from, both of you, of course, we have to, as INSEAD also, and as everybody, to consider always the whole world. Thank you very much. Very difficult topics. Lots of insights here. It's been a pleasure being with you. Thank you, everybody, for attending this webinar, and hopefully you have a nice evening, afternoon, night, depending where you are. Thank you, and take care. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.